Hello and welcome to J Hutch Talks Too Much. Tonight we are talking about the 1981 film Thief, starring the great Jim Belushi. No, he is in the movie, but starring James Caan. I'm here with my friend Anders, who's does a lot of great film work over at Three Brothers Film with his two brothers, and does the podcast Three Brothers Filmcast, which is a fantastic listen.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's
Thanks
great.
for having me. It's fun to be
Thanks
back.
so much for being here. Thanks so much for coming back. You're my first return guest, which I'm pretty excited about. So tonight we were talking about Thief. Now you're a bigger, we've just been talking. You're a fairly big Michael Mann fan.
Yeah,
is that right?
like I would say, sort of my biography with Mann is I was a big fan of Last of the Mohicans when I was like in my early teens.
Yeah.
I still think it's a great film, although somewhat out of the normal Michael Mann subject matter.
Right.
And then I saw Heat shortly after it came out in the later 90s in high school, and I loved it. And from then on, I went to see any of his new movies when they came out. The only one I've now since gone back, I finally, with Criterion's release, caught up with Thief, and the only one I have yet to see is probably his least acclaimed, which is his least acclaimed, which is The Keep, his follow-up to Thief. So,
what's that one about?
It's like a medieval horror type thing, which is kind of different, as far as I understand. Yeah,
what's
kind of schlocky and stuff, but.
Does Mann kind of fit into a particular scene? Like you kind of have the Scorsese, Coppola, that group of people who are kind of friends.
Well, he went to school in film school in London with, I think, Ridley Scott and those guys. So commercial directors. But there's a couple other guys. It might be Alan Pakula or someone like that.
Right.
But so I would say he's actually in some ways, I think he's a little more consistent in terms of his auteur interests than Ridley Scott per se, but I think he also comes out of the same Ridley Scott guys who are very technically apt filmmakers and who also can and do like work in genre, but what you might call a sort of prestige take on genre in some ways, partly which I think initially comes in through their craftsmanship and the quality of like the work that they put together. So that's what I would say.
And Thief is his first movie, and the thing that a lot of people will remark on is just how self-assured this movie was for a debut film. And I'm not as much of I don't know too much of Michael Mann. As I say, I've seen Last of the Mohicans, I've seen The Insider, but I've never followed his career. I remember when Heat came out, I was probably about 15 years old, 14, 15. I don't think I would have been able to get into that movie at the time. And for some reason, I just never saw it after that. I was a huge Scorsese guy pretty early on. And I don't know if that had something to do with it, but I just thought it was like a rivalry of some sorts. Although it strikes me that they're extremely different filmmakers.
Yeah. I think other than it might be the presence of De Niro, Pacino, and then the sort of, again, take on the crime genre in that sense, right? Yeah. But Michael Mann also, like, I would say he's enough of he's got a very, very consistent, other than a few outliers like Last of the Mohicans, although there's aspects of Last of the Mohicans that actually I do think fit in with some of his interests in terms of like codes of honor, men living on like the edge of the sort of social system and the way that they negotiate like interpersonal relationships, particularly with women, and then how that overlaps with their sense of duty or professionalism, if you want to call it that. Which I think that's actually the right word to use for Mann, professionalism, right? Like even think about like Hawkeye and his father Chingachgook and brother. They're like pros. They're like the guys you bring in for like the hunt, like when they join up with the British. And they're the best of the best, right? And like I think a lot of guys in Mann's films are like that. But then there's also people who are sort of just outside on the edge of the system are outcast as well. I think you get some of that in The Insider, as well as you get the professionalism of 60 Minutes and stuff like that, journalism.
And in many ways, Frank, who James Caan plays in Thief, is kind of both of those.
Yeah,
he strikes me as being the best jewel thief there is.
Again, because of his technical acumen, right? His ability and his fine eye for aesthetic detail.
That's right.
For those two things that he's, I love the opening sequence, and you can maybe give people a rundown of the film after this, but the opening heist in Thief is mesmerizing with no dialogue or little dialogue of the way that they burn through the safe with the welding material and stuff like that. It's fascinating and just almost hypnotic.
Yeah, and Mann really gives us a sense of this as a job, and it's something that these people are taking very seriously, and that they know how to do it well. You can certainly tell that this is not the first time that they've done something like this. It is. It's that first opening scene really does kind of set the stage appropriately for the rest of the movie, and establishes a lot of things I think that you need to know as the movie unfolds. So let's maybe give a quick little rundown of this movie. I did write out this synopsis, and if I read it all the way through, it's 2 minutes, I think, roughly 2 minutes, which I could read it out all the way through. And maybe, as I said to you, I'm going to try and wing it, and then we can maybe go back and forth.
Sure. And we'll fill in the details as we talk about things.
Yeah. I will say, I don't think any of my synopsis brings up the Willie Nelson character at all, who is a very interesting character.
Yeah, but they named the kid after him.
They do name the kid after him. Yeah. So Frank, James Caan plays this character named Frank, who, as we say, is kind of this expert jewel thief. He actually runs a car dealership by day.
Legitimate business.
The so-called legitimate business. It's obviously this front for his criminal activities. But we find out he's this kind of very independent guy, and he has this sort of code of his own. His code is actually, I want to get the wording of this right. Because he says it later on in the movie, but his code is nothing means nothing. Which is kind of the central ethos that we seem to get from this guy. And the reason why he has this code, also we learn later on in the movie, is he was in jail for 11 years for stealing $40, I think, is basically
something like really, yeah.
And when he's in jail, he basically learns to, essentially rely on nobody. Don't get attached to anything. Don't get attached to anyone.
I'm sensing these themes again.
Exactly. But at the same time, he carries around this collage that he made. And it's this picture.
It's such a thoughtful, sweet thing.
It is. It keeps it
kind
of nice.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Little touches like that, right?
You have kids, and there's a car, and there's a home.
It's a memory board or a vision board. It's a vision board.
Yeah, it's a vision board, exactly. And he's got Willie Nelson is in it as well, which wasn't in the original synopsis, but he's in there.
Yeah,
he's in the corner. So okay, so he's got this college, which speaks to, he has this dream of having a family, having a wife, having a kid, having a home, and he says in this big monologue in the middle of the movie, great scene, which I think we'll talk a fair amount about, but says, nothing's going to stop me from getting this. So now back to the beginning of the movie, he does this heist. He's independent, but he gives his wares to a receiver, I guess.
Yeah,
and this kind of in-between guy, and but now the in-between guy then ends up dead very quickly. So we only see him for one scene. He ends up dead, and then I'll skip over a bunch of stuff, but eventually this crime syndicate gets in touch with Frank and says, "We've heard about you. We want you to come work for us." Frank is very hesitant because he's an independent guy, but he eventually reluctantly decides, "Okay, I'm going to do this one deal," basically because now his relationship with this lady named Jessie, who's played by Tuesday Weld, is starting to grow. So he's like, okay, this is my opportunity to get out. This is my opportunity to get the things that I've always wanted. I'll do this job. He's supposed to get $830,000 from it. So he's like, okay, I'll do it. Meanwhile, it turns out Tuesday Weld, Jesse, cannot have a child. So the boss, Leo, the crime syndicate boss, Leo's like, what do you want? I can make this happen for you. And he does. He gets a black market baby.
I've acquired a child on the black market. It's like, what the...
We don't know too much of the details about this. We don't want to know too much of the details about this. Nobody wants to know. But they get the baby from the black market. And I don't know if the words black market are ever actually used. I'm just imposing that on the film. But
you want a kid? I can get you a kid. Come on.
Sure. I mean, look, I'm sure that I bet you that, well, again, we don't know where this movie is heading at this point, but I'm sure that kid was happy to be in that situation. So Frank, James Caan, carries out this heist in LA. Most of the movie's taking place in Chicago.
Yeah.
But the heist is in LA, the big score. They successfully get it. Meanwhile, the Chicago police are on Frank's back, not because they want to catch him committing a crime, but because they just want to get a cut of the deal. They want some kind of payout. But again, because Frank is an independent card, he's not going to give a payout to anybody. He's going to do things his own way. So he successfully does the heist. He meets up with the crime boss, Leo. Leo only gives him like $70,000-$80,000. And James Caan says, what's the deal with this? And he says, I'll give you the rest of the money when you do these other deals for me. And Frank says, no, our deal was to just do this, to just do this one. And he says he's not going to do it. And Leo retaliates by killing Jim Belushi, by killing who was Frank's partner. I know I just kind of threw that in. He kills Jim Belushi there. Yeah. Bit of a side swipe. But Jim Belushi was Frank's partner,
right?
And kills him, and then basically tells Frank, "You have no choice. I own the papers on your life," or something like that. He says, and he says, "You're beholden to me. I got you this kid. I got this kid off the black market for you. You've got to do this for me.
You owe me.
You owe me." But also, I think the implication is you owe me for life. Yeah. Like, I don't think there's this kind of
idea. You don't get out. I'll give you a good salary and take care of you, but you don't get out.
It's like it's a mafia, essentially, and so, okay, so now anybody who's watching this doesn't want to get spoiled on the end. I'm skip over the next minute because I'll reveal it now. What happens? Frank decides how he's going to solve this problem is he's going to basically get rid of Jesse and the kid. Sends them packing. And then destroys all of his places of business. He blows up his car dealership. He blows up his home. He blows up the bar that they've been hanging out with. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but he does that. That seems like friendly.
Does he own the bar though?
Well, that's what I was trying to find out. I was watching it again just before tonight, and he certainly receives a lot of phone calls there.
Yeah, that's what, because it feels like his office. Yeah, like kind of.
Yeah, I think he must have some connection to that.
And it's William Peterson makes this one of his earliest film appearances as the bartender there.
I don't know if I know who that is. William Peterson.
He was in Manhunter,
okay,
and I guess for TV people, I think he was on CSI for many years.
Okay.
But Manhunter, he plays Will Graham. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so a Manhunter, another big Michael Mann.
Yeah. And To Live and Die in LA, he's in that too. Yeah.
He's in what? Sorry.
To Live and Die in LA.
Okay.
Right? I haven't seen that film, but
I haven't seen it either. No,
it's on my list to watch. Yeah. I hope people come away. They're like, I like when Anders shows up on JHTTM because then I just make a list of all these movies that we want to watch.
I know. I have watched a couple that came up in the last one.
We could maybe talk about the end.
Yes, definitely.
Anyway, we better quickly spoil it before you get like.
Oh yeah, before. Seconds. Okay, if you came back to watch it, I haven't got there yet, so you give me another minute. So he does all of those things. He goes to Leo's house. and he kills everybody there. That's basically it. And then he seems to get shot, but I think he's wearing a bulletproof vest, and he seems to get away with it. So that's the story. So I will say, sort of right off the bat, I'd never seen this movie until the other night. Watched it for the first time. It instantly became part of my great movies list, which is pretty exciting because the 80s to me are a bit of a barren decade.
Then there's a lot for you to discover, because I actually think the 80s are way better than people. If you stay away from just like the mainstream Hollywood song, it's a great decade.
Right.
Like, and it starts off really strong, like obviously with some of my favorite movies, including Empire Strikes Back, Raging Bull, The Shining, but also you've got some really underrated gems, things like, have you ever seen The Ninth Configuration?
No, never heard
Peter
of that.
William Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist, directed it based on his own novel.
Oh, wow.
And it stars Stacy Keach, and it's a sort of post-Vietnam mind bender about a bunch of men in an insane asylum that's a castle in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh my God.
Yeah, anyway, I don't want to take up too much time on this, but maybe that would be one to talk about sometime, because that's
okay. Ninth Configure. I'm writing that one down. Yeah. I mean, do I need to write this down?
No, people can just
to film, but
I agree. So I mentioned earlier that I've been a Mann fan for a long time, but I only came to this one finally in the last year, because we got a copy of the DVD or Blu-ray from a friend of mine, and watched it actually before it was even on Criterion Channel, because I was like, I really need to finally catch up on those last couple Mann films, right? And I was like, I think I wrote in my Letterboxd review something like, I think it's something you alluded to already in this broadcast, that it emerges so fully formed. It's like so few directors. Yes, I know that he did a TV movie, Jericho Mile, and he'd done some TV work and stuff, but like, for an auteur's vision to it, it's not just like you can see the seeds of it. It's like, no, it's there. It's like it's a fully formed Michael Mann movie.
Yeah.
Now, in some ways, you can definitely see aspects in which Heat is like the autorial remake of this on that bigger epic scale. Like the themes are extremely similar,
right?
Except for that it brings in the whole other character of the cop, the Al Pacino character. I think so. In one sense, maybe it's like Thief and Manhunter kind of merged together, where you have these like two main characters, but in this world of professional thieves and cops, and and this idea that it's like your job. It's like it's like the cats and the dogs being like, this is just what we have to do. Like, it's just, I got to bring you in, and I got to try to outwit you. That's my job, to outwit you, And it has some really, like, if you think about, I mentioned like some of the set pieces in this one are really good, not necessarily in like action movie sense, but just in terms of like memorable moments where, but also in dramatic moments. So you mentioned the diner scene, right? As well as some of the heists and obviously the explosive finale and all that. And that's something Mann would, I think, come back to. Like, he's good at integrating set pieces into a larger narrative in a way that doesn't seem like a roller coaster ride or something like that. That's rather like forwards the story and is really good that way. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that in Heat he does this, like the criminal and the cop thing, and that element is not really, that dualism is not in Thief. You have criminals and you have cops, but you don't.
Maybe it's actually more in Frank himself.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah, I think so. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But I think that's a really good point. But also, like, while you might not see that specific kind of dynamic in terms of characters, what fascinated me about the making of this movie is that Mann was very much part of both of those worlds. He was part of both the police world. So famously, well, semi-famously, a consultant on his early work is Dennis Farina.
Yeah, who was a cop.
Isn't
that so true? Like, if you looked at Dennis Farina and said, what job is he in real life? You'd be like, he's like a friendly American cop, right?
Yeah,
like, he's got the mustache. Like a cop. He's like such a stereotypical cop.
He is, absolutely. And I like Dennis Farina a lot. I think that he was a great actor.
Yeah,
I still think his performance.
He passed too soon. Yeah, go ahead.
It is his performance. I think in Get Shorty is.
I also really love him in the other Elmore Leonard adaptation, Out of Sight, just a little role as J-Lo's dad. Right?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. I forgot
that movie is one of the most stacked. There's another all Best in the 90s movies. Is Out of Sight,
Out of Sight is a fantastic.
So like Mann, Soderbergh, but there's actually, to go full circle, I think Mann, like Soderbergh, is also a guy who is a consummate professional in a lot of ways himself as a filmmaker and the way that he goes about his craft and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Also in Out of Sight, Albert Brooks.
Yeah, he's great in that. He's like,
he is.
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but he's the, I guess you'd say one of the main antagonists. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. God, yeah, Out of Sight. It's been years since I've seen it, but it's a great
I got the Blu-ray if you want to borrow it.
I might take you up on that. So he's in this world. Mann is in this world of doing research with the police, but he's also very much ensconced in a criminal world. He spends time in Folsom Prison, not as a criminal, but to do research.
Research.
Yeah, and also there are not only cops acting in Thief, but there are also criminals acting in Thief as well. So I think we just talked about John Sartucci, who was a real life thief, provided a lot of information, but also provided a lot of the tools that you'll see in the film are actual tools that he would have used in real life to carry out his actual real life crimes.
And he's like, I'll explain. It's like technical advice, right? Like, it's great.
Yeah, exactly. Technical assistant. Just so long as you don't tell anybody about this, I'll tell you all the information.
We're just gonna make a movie being seen by millions. It's okay.
And you're gonna be in it. And he is in it. He plays a cop.
It's funny because Dennis Farina plays a criminal.
Yeah, that's right. So that's right. Yeah, Farina plays a criminal. Is Farina in it any more than just walking across this?
Yeah, no, he's in near the end, right? When he's
he comes back. Okay. So, but yeah, John Sartucci plays this corrupt cop. Everybody's corrupt in this movie. There isn't anybody who's not like, for example, there's the scene where, sorry if this is hopping all over the place for anybody listening, but there is a scene where James Caan is trying to get his buddy. Is it Okla?
Yeah,
I keep wanting to say Okja because of that.
It's Okla, movie. I think. Yeah.
But
he's trying to Willie Nelson. Yeah,
we're trying to get Willie Nelson out of jail, and so he hires this lawyer to try and get rid of habeas corpus, and you can see. And actually, it's very well done because nobody ever explains what this means in the movie, but you just can tell where the judge is making a statement and he does this, and then the
other guy does it too,
and does this with 2 fingers, and then the judge makes a statement with 3, and then the lawyer does 3, and then he gets rid of habeas corpus. So obviously, a deal is being made in this way. Which is a great moment in the movie as well. But again, a demonstration of how just about everybody in this movie is corrupt on some level, except for maybe Tuesday Weld. She might be, except she's also, her former boyfriend was a drug dealer and stuff like that. We learned too. So yeah, I mean that relationship between police and criminals, Mann also described it as oftentimes these police and criminals grew up together in the same town.
What the movie it reminds me then later is, of course, The Departed, right?
Right.
Where that blurring of it's just kind of like for luck, whichever gang you're born into. Are you born into the cops or the gang, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of that, a lot in any film that touches on probably some of the way things actually run in some of those big cities in the US and other places. There's like a symbiotic relationship almost between the two.
And that probably, without having seen the movie, so you have, so feel free to correct me rather on this, but I feel like that probably does for Michael Mann reach its apex with that scene in Heat where you have the cop and the criminal at the same table.
Yeah, and they talk about how the kind of their mutual respect for each other, right?
Right.
And and I think that's there's an interesting thing there that Mann, even though he's a formally educated film director, he his time he spent doing the preparation for what is it, and Jericho Mile, I think really had an impact on his understanding that these men in prison were not dumb. They were not, aggressive all constantly. They actually also had thoughts and dreams and philosophies and their own kind of weird to us moral codes, right? And that comes up again and again in his films. It's like, I mean, even his most recent film, which is sadly like 6 years ago, Black Hat, is about a guy who goes to prison as a hacker and then is pulled out by the U.S. government to stop a hacking thing happening in Hong Kong and Asia, and they go travel the world. It's funny. It's Chris Hemsworth, right?
Oh.
And there's a scene where, because you and I both watched one of the documentaries on the Criterion, right? With it's a longer form interview with Mann, and he talks about the library and the prison and these guys educating themselves and not and actually taking these ideas seriously, like the philosophies, existentialism, and things that there's a great scene in Black Hat where Chris Hemsworth, completely jacked, is like doing an inverted push-up while reading Discipline and Punished by Foucault. And it's like, and it's so good.
Boy, was the irony of the moment aware? Was he aware of that?
I guess I don't know. He's like, this book seems to be about prisons. I should read it.
So actually, I want to read those quotes, which I did read to you before we started, but I want to read it again because I want to ask you what you think of this movie's status as it gets frequently categorized as a neo-noir.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, maybe just before we even have this conversation, just discuss what a noir is. How do you see a noir? Like, I mean, again, an example of a noir would be like early noir is the Maltese Falcon.
Probably the first,
Yeah, but movies like Double Indemnity,
mm-hmm.
I think.
To me, Double Indemnity is like the most like iconic one in that way.
Yeah.
But I would include things like obviously Out of the Past and
Laura.
I could definitely. I think a lot of people say Touch of Evil would be like the last one.
Right.
By Wells.
Right.
And then there'd be some that would be classified as noir that are not even necessarily like crime films. Like I think Sunset Boulevard's noir.
Yeah.
So what I see noir as is not really a genre per se, but it's a stylistic tendency and partly a function of subject matter and form that came in the period during and immediately after World War II and reflected sort of the anxieties and sort of feeling of moral murkiness of these men who, they've been told they saved, the world, but they also like committed horrible atrocities,
right?
And are coming back and being expected to like reintegrate into a workforce. You have the increasing presence of women in the workforce, and then their sort of troubled return to domesticity in the 50s, which sort of bursts in some ways the femme fatale and the male anxiety over powerful sort of women there. You get a lot of shadow. You get, there's a lot of drawing on German expressionism, particularly, but it's not really like a formal genre in which like, it has to have certain other elements, more like as the French would say, a certain tendency in cinema.
Right.
But,
Andre Bazin would say something like that.
Or Truffaut. That's Truffaut.
Oh, that is Truffaut. Okay.
He wrote the certain tendency.
I knew it had to have come from Cahiers du Cinéma.
But I'm talking about movies. I get too pretentious, but I just
I
just love it so much. But yeah, so the noir is that, right? And then by the 60s, it's over, right?
Yeah.
But then the neo-noir would be sort of a conscious attempt to go back and ape certain of those stylistic elements and incorporate them in. And so the neo-noir is probably more fuzzy and broad in its categories because it's not anchored by any time, but it's a self-conscious sort of interaction with those initial films. Sometimes literally in the case of things like Body Heat is basically Double Indemnity.
Right. Right.
But you can have it, and then you have the archetypal ones like Chinatown.
Yes.
Which do the noir, but with a much more, explicit, but also like different kind of production and concepts there, but explores a lot of the same stuff. And then people would even say something like Blade Runner, I think, is a neo-noir in a lot of ways, just transposing it to a science fiction universe, which is interesting. Ridley Scott, and now I said earlier Mann. So yeah, I think that's how I would describe it. So I don't know. What's your thought on it?
No, I think that you're absolutely right. The only thing that I would just flesh out a little bit, just to say that, like you say, a lot of film noirs, though they don't have to be, do sort of focus on detectives, and because you have that sort of World War II instigated moral instability, the noir detectives,
they're often private detectives. First of all,
they're independent.
They're often drawing on the pulp crime thrillers of earlier era.
Yeah,
they're not co-extensive with them. That's the thing a lot of people mistake, is that they sort of, and so you'll actually have otherwise quite knowledgeable film fans call like certain gangster movies from the 30s noirs, but they're not noirs. They can't be a noir. Right. But they may or may not engage with that same sort of Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
and the noir detective almost frequently is they're in a broken world, right?
Yeah.
So
and that's how it also, the other way of just, you can be, the question of whether or not the detective investigator movie that you're watching is a noir. I think one of the clues is this: do they solve the crime? Are all the answers given to you at the end?
Right.
Or are you more confused than when you began?
Yeah. Well,
because that, I think, is one of the, but that, they apparently, the director doesn't even know what the answer is. But that's to me, along with the sort of, ennui and existentialist sort of lostness, I would say that lack of certainty in institutions or even the nature of reality and answers is a big part of noir.
Yeah. And even if they do solve the crime, that they haven't fixed anything.
The world, no.
Yeah, something still in, like Sherlock Holmes, the world is restored.
Exactly, and that's one of the appeal of a lot of mystery movies, and so you have a lot of like strict mystery fans don't like noir, really.
Yeah, that's right, because things aren't wrapped up nicely.
There's no resolution.
Yeah,
and in a true dramatic sense.
Yeah, and a neo-noir. I wonder if neo-noir, because the neo-noir comes out of the Vietnam era as opposed to the World War II era,
right?
And I wonder if it's post-Watergate. So it's really the same feelings that are driving the neo-noir. One thing you don't have is
but it never goes away.
It doesn't go away, exactly. You don't have the same like Hays Code or anything. So you can have like,
they're often explicit violence and sex.
Yeah, and you have an ending like Chinatown, which is even worse than anything that the 40s noir films could ever imagine.
Exactly. And they can get pretty dark.
They can, yeah. They can still be very dark.
And I make a habit of watching a fair bit of noir. I would not call myself I would not go so far as to call myself an expert.
Yeah.
But I watch a lot, and I've seen a lot of noir films that are deep cuts, right? Like, but also, so like last week I watched Pick Up on South Street, the Sam Fuller film.
I haven't seen it, but I'd love to see
it. That's a movie you could be shocked is from when it was 53, because there is quite like explicit violence and like kind of shocking, like abusive people and things like that. And yeah.
Now Fuller is almost an anomaly.
Yeah, he is. I mean, and this is before he would go on to make what is it? Naked Kiss, and I was thinking, what's the one about the insane asylum?
Yeah, it's Shock Corridor.
Shock Corridor. I literally have it on the shelf over
there. Yeah. But no. So, but
earlier, I Pick Up on South Street is a noir for sure.
Yeah,
it just pushes the limit of like, what you can do back then.
Yeah.
And you get things like Kiss Me Deadly.
Kiss Me Deadly, yes, exactly.
Love that movie.
So I want to read this quote because, as I said to you before, I think it's really amusing because he's asked in this interview, "Were you thinking about film noirs at all?" And his answer is, "I wasn't thinking consciously about film noir at all. I think a true film noir." In a true film noir, there's really a sense of hopelessness, a sense of ennui. It's the same events of the horrors of World War II that produce existentialism, beginning with the thought of why should I not commit suicide, which we said is not a great definition of existentialism.
Yeah.
That question is there. How do you process the scale of industrial murder in World War II? And he says, and that's not Thief. Thief doesn't have those kinds of themes. Now, about 5 minutes later in the same interview, he says this. He's asked about how his experiences at Folsom Prison informed Thief, and he said the convicts were alive and kind of flamboyant in language and dress and tattoos. And I realized these were very aggressive type A personalities who asked themselves very fundamental questions when they got long sentences, like, how should I view the rest of my time? How should I view the rest of my life? Why don't I just commit suicide right now and get this over with? He's saying the exact same thing that he was saying just a few minutes ago. So, I don't know if Mann has fully entirely thought that one through a little bit, but I do think that I mean.
So what do you think?
Those themes at work.
You see those things in the film?
Yeah, I think that Frank's experiences in prison have left him in some ways, but he's battling as well.
Right, and I think there is more hope in Thief than most noirs. Right, like we said, Frank sends Jesse and the kid away, but he's gonna look after them, right? They're taken care of.
Yes,
that's his
gives
plan,
them money.
right? He gives them money. That's what in a house, right, or whatever, or sends them somewhere to a house. And he, has a clear plan, and I think the idea of having a clear plan that it kind of pushes against that. But then he's the interesting thing is that Mann makes that comment about linking existentialism to suicide twice.
Mm-hmm.
When I think Frank is an example of a character who is an existentialist who has tried to find meaning in the world and is content with that meaning. And, so he has like his vision board, right? The little paper that he looks at with the, this is what I'm going to want and I'm going to manifest it. I don't think it's like some sort of like, I'm going to manifest this thing by like meditating on it. It's more like, remind yourself, this is what you're doing. This is the goal. This is the plan. And that creates a sense of daily meaning, in which he then integrates into his like professional, like ritual, a kind of ritualistic existence in that way. So he has like taken the existentialist like call that one has to like take ownership of one's own life and find your own sense of meaning, and that man does make meaning, that not that meaning doesn't exist, but that it is made by human beings in our, pursuit of things. He really takes that and says, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. And I'll get everything that that anyone would want, So I think, but at the same time, I think he's constrained by America, constrained by the limitations of both the current criminal world and the sort of larger, federal capitalistic system of like governance and things like that. And corruption and what you might want to say, if you were inclined to a religious reading of it, you would say brokenness or sin or something like that. But like so there's that aspect of the existentialism that cannot overcome on its own. It's not so it actually rejects the sort of sort of idea of the existentialist as anti-collective, that they are self-made by your bootstraps type of idea. So it's actually, I think, a very interesting and subtle philosophical portrait as a film.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. The idea of him being constrained by America, I think, is a really crucial thing that I do want to get into before we later on tonight. But to go back to your point there about him finding meaning, I agree with that, but I think it's funny. A lot of things that I have read in preparation for this discussion, they separate out two things that actually in the film happen at the same time, and the separation that they make, I think, allows them to have a neater reading of the film than the film actually is allowing us to have. and it takes place in that diner scene where he gives Tuesday Weld, Jesse, the code, which is nothing means nothing, but at the same time he gives her the collage. And the way people often talk about that movie is to say he has this code. They'll start off an article, let's say, and they say this guy has a code. It's nothing means nothing, and then a few paragraphs down later talking about something else, they're like, and then he brings out this collage, which means that nothing doesn't mean nothing anymore. But in fact, in the movie, those two things are mentioned at the exact same time. And I don't know if we have any reason to believe.
No, but doesn't that, because it's a double negative? Like, nothing means nothing. Everything means something.
Okay. I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, that's fair.
That, like, every action, and it's in his existentialist, it's every action has a consequence and a meaning, because this is what creates your reality. Your actions determine to some degree. It's not an idealist, philosophy. It emerges through the work that and the behavior that a person does, not just simply belief.
I mean, I think that's a good reading, because obviously things do mean something to him, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't have that collage there, certainly. But he will also give off the impression, like, don't get attached, don't. But there's also this drive in him, seems to be simultaneously, to get attached. I mean, what is the dream of wanting to be married, having a child?
Exactly.
But
and that's something that Macaulay in Heat is not quite the same character, right?
Is that right?
Like, it's darker. Like,
okay.
Like, his whole speech of, you like, just leave. Don't let yourself get attached to anything. When you feel the heat coming around the corner, you drop everything and you go.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that is a darker philosophy in some ways.
Yes. Yeah.
And the struggle there is not a guy who admits that he wants this thing and is going about it in a questionable way. It's a guy who knows that that's a temptation to want to start to build bonds with people, but keeps himself very, very cold and distanced. Yeah.
But would you say that's the lesson? What's the name of that character in Heat?
Macaulay.
Macaulay?
Macaulay. Yeah. That's so, and then Hannah is the cop.
Okay.
Pacino.
So, do you think that Macaulay is kind of the James Caan character a little farther down the road?
Yeah, that could be.
But
another decade and a half down the road, also. In America, right?
Yeah.
Like, the Heat is a very 90s movie. LA, right? It's all in LA. It's the the brightness and the sharpness and Hannah has a really, like, fancy, like, modernist apartment and thing. Like, it's very like it's really where you get that idea of Michael Mann as, like, sort of kind of like cool surfaces and, like, digital. Like, even before digital, you knew he was a guy who was going to gravitate toward digital filmmaking because the crispness of the image and the
interesting. You can see that. Yeah. You can see that both in the way.
So you haven't seen Collateral either.
No. No, that's one you'd recommend.
Okay. I mean, that's an interesting one, because that's also Tom Cruise is a villain, right?
Oh, okay. Yes.
Tom Cruise is a hitman, and Jamie Foxx is a taxi driver who gets, like, drawn into it.
Interesting. Well, as long as we're talking about the era, I want to actually show one thing here. I'm going to bring something up. It's actually something that your brother wrote. So I'm going to share this article on Thief from 3brothersfilm.com that your brother Aaron wrote. And so there's a couple things in here. He says, well, and it's both basically making the same point. They say that with Thief, that Mann weds the gritty auteurism of the 1970s with the flashier stylisms of the 1980s. And he makes a similar point here, right?
The new Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah, Thief's filmmaking both resembles the new Hollywood movement and looks forward to the stylish and often empty 1980s.
I think it's important to also note that one of the producers of Thief is Jerry Bruckheimer.
That's right. That's right.
Who would take the stylish and empty to its
ultimate conclusion. Yeah. What do you think about that? Is that something that you agree with? Do you see?
I see. I actually, especially his earlier films, I think even as far as latest Manhunter have a bit of that 70s New Hollywood feel to them.
Yeah.
Also, he's working with actor like Khan, who is like so associated with that era. I think that's partly what is getting in Aaron's head. But I think it's also that idea that you could explore genres with like seriousness and quality. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, which is something that like films like The Godfather and Chinatown do, right? Like,
maybe if we could just quickly explain what we mean by New Hollywood, just in case there are people out there who don't know.
Like
that. Well, you go ahead because
you go ahead.
I mean, New Hollywood to me is a consequence of the studio system collapsing, and in the 1960s, and you start to see the emergence of independent cinema, independent American filmmakers who really have their own vision in terms of what they are producing. People like Francis Ford Coppola, people like
John
Cassavetes and Martin Scorsese and Peter Bogdanovich and people like that start to emerge out of this, very much influenced by kind of the European cinema, I would say, from maybe the decade before that, 55.
Yeah, because I think that in a lot of ways, the New Hollywood is sort of building on some of the new wave in France and other places, and the as you said, the collapse of the studio system to some degree, although it was a lot of times the changing the guard at the studios themselves who would produce these films,
right,
and give more freedom to directors. It was also one of the first times you had a whole influx of film school students, right, for the first time, not self-taught people or people came up in the Guild, but actually people who came from film school, which is interesting. And the New Hollywood then is ups things with, like, in terms of sex and violence in Hollywood films, right?
Yeah.
Like, and famously, you can probably point to it that what is the New Hollywood's born with Bonnie and Clyde, and dies with Heaven's Gate.
A lot of things died with Heaven's Gate,
but the Michael Cimino film, right?
And we're not even talking about the cult. This is a film that caused a lot of problems, but I mean the standard narrative, if you watch
Thief is only like a year after that. I mean, maybe arguably something like Raging Bull is also on the borderline between New Hollywood but because Scorsese himself is more closely affiliated with some of the New Hollywood guys, even though he's one of the younger ones, you get that.
It makes sense.
It feels more continuity. Yeah, there's more continuity with his.
Yeah, and I think I would see certain scenes in Thief as being things that I would not be surprised with seeing in a 70s.
Including the diner scene.
The diner scene is probably the best example of it, and I think I would say that's my favorite part of the movie. But that just speaks to my own particular taste.
No, it's really good. I mean,
I mean,
you don't just want to watch a guy silently welding through a safe.
I, mean, I like that too. I like that as well.
Make a YouTube channel on a loop of that.
It could be ASMR for some people, but he, it's basically James Caan delivering a monologue. It's almost like theater, basically, that you're watching. And it's where we're getting a lot of this information that we're sort of talking about in terms of the characters, where he talks about being in jail, where he talks about
it's a massive amount of character development in such a small time.
Yeah, and it's a great moment, and it does feel like, actually, I was just thinking today, an interesting paper that somebody could write about is the role of diners in American cinema, because diners play a really key role in a lot of movies, especially in that time period from the 70s into the 80s. There's even a movie called Diner.
Like Taxi Driver and stuff like that.
Taxi Driver, yeah. It kind of fulfills the same role that like the cafe.
But that's also a throwback to noir films often had diners, right?
That's true. That is true, yeah. Maybe just diners are always there in American cinema.
As a native Torontonian, you would probably have more experience. Like in Saskatchewan growing up, I didn't really
diners.
There's not diners like that, really. I mean, there were, but they had fallen into quite a bit of disrepair, stuff like that. But like coming into Ontario, and I remember going to like the Lakeview Diner?
Yes.
On Dundas.
Yep. Yeah.
And being like, yeah, this is a real diner. Right?
This is what it is.
And to the point that literally, I remember watching Guillermo del Toro's Shape of Water and being like, oh, that's the diner in that movie.
Oh yeah.
The Lakeview Diner.
Yeah. Lakeview Diner, I feel like, has a bit of that Taxi Driver sort of style to it.
And they're open late, right? So for people who are transient, people who are there, it's like the whole idea is a restaurant that's open all night, right?
Yeah.
The original 24/7 McDonald's.
Yes. Right? Yes.
If you're doing today, now you can have it in a fast food. And actually, the key scene in Heat, it takes place more in a
fast food
restaurant type,
that's
like Glass, California kind of.
That's very interesting. I think there's a paper there, or there's a book there for somebody, not for me, but somebody.
I don't know. Yeah. Maybe they're. I think Michael Mann would be like a good. There's people who've written a lot about him, but I think there's more to be said.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
But I mean, there are quite a few academic, works of it on him. But like to do something that was like sort of like in between, sort of popular criticism, but also something more academic would be nice.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm sure there's a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the standard narrative, if you watch any movie on the New Hollywood, is that really the you're right to say that Heaven's Gate is a big marker, but usually when they start talking about Star Wars, there's about 5 minutes left in this documentary on New Hollywood.
Yeah, they love to blame Spielberg and Lucas for destroying New Hollywood. But the funny thing is that I think that the very strengths that allowed them to create those two films in particular, which, say what you will about the things they legitimately spawned, are themselves very fine movies. Like Jaws you go back and watch Jaws, has a lot more in common with the New Hollywood.
Oh
film.
Yeah, it's a New Hollywood movie,
right? The central scenes are like like the Quince USS Indianapolis speech. It's like that kind of. You see that in Thief as well. I think in that sense, I actually think Thief is more of a piece with like guys like Lucas, Spielberg, Ridley Scott, who we went to school with, and then who are emerging from that New Hollywood, but are sort of more attuned to genre in a more like pulpy way, rather than they didn't have the same exact relationship to the sort of the end of the 60s per se. Maybe they were the slightly younger ones whose friends had to go to Vietnam, and Oliver Stone, I think, is maybe one who I'd put in that era as well. Yeah. That generation of guys.
Yeah.
Coppola sort of the big brother to them in a lot of ways.
Right.
And I think that, so I would maybe, Thief, I think should go there. So people always write that epitaph, and I think there's some truth there, but also it was the hubris and the self-destructive behaviors of those guys that led to the end of the New Hollywood as well.
Absolutely. So you get those kinds of stories too, right? The famous stories of New York, Martin Scorsese's movie.
Just blitzed out of his mind, yeah.
Yeah, what was going on there? And Apocalypse Now has that kind of narrative, that story associated with it, which is obviously a phenomenal movie, but in my opinion, anyways. Yeah. And
but I think literally people may have died on the set.
On Apocalypse Now?
When the hurricane hit and stuff.
Oh, really? Oh, God. Okay, yeah.
I mean, the famous story is that Martin Sheen like had a heart attack and almost died.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. From a scene, right?
Too much alcohol and speed, I think.
Who knew that wouldn't work out? But so this is all leading me to an observation I have about this movie, which I don't know, I haven't necessarily seen other people make, but maybe they have. But if you have New Hollywood as being sort of, even if it's just if I'm just stereotyping here, but I still think it might be worthwhile pursuing. If New Hollywood in some ways demonstrates Hollywood when it's independent and free, and the end of that era is the rise, the reforming of the studio system when the director auteur becomes less independent and less free. and that's how that starts to happen in the 1980s. That Thief, as a movie that comes out in 1981, might not only be playing out this 1970s, 1980s style that Aaron is, I think, correctly pointing out, but also is playing that scenario out in terms of its content. Mm-hmm. So you have a character who really wants to be independent, but at the same time finds himself inextricably linked to...
It's too good of a deal. You can't pass it up. Exactly. They'll give you all the money to do all the best heists. I mean, make all the best movies that you want to do.
Does that make sense?
Because all you really care about is your art, and because you're a consummate professional first and foremost, right? You're a craftsman. You're not. Mm-hmm. I think that actually is and I think it's one thing. Now, I think we live in. If I can go on a rant,
go for it.
I think we as a culture, and I think some of that boomer '70s New Hollywood generation. How do I put this? Had a very romantic sense of the artist. And there is a dismissal sometimes of craft and technique and the ability to do things really, really well in that way that I think is starting to has in many cases degraded the quality of American independent film. Like they're just technically unpolished in a way, and they are not as ambitious in some ways as what you would get, like, you know, from a Mann or a Ridley Scott or even a George Lucas and his team or a Steven Spielberg, who, whatever your thoughts of the merits of their stories are, consummate craftsmen, the best special effects, the best shots, and I think with someone like Spielberg, people are more willing to enter into the conversation that professionalism as an auteur emerges in a way in which his films are also just extremely well scripted, paced, edited. You know, he works obviously with really good teams of people. Can't film narrative coherence. Whether you don't buy their sentimentalism or whatever you want to accuse it of, they're, you know, the craft spills over into some artistic or narrative elements and acting as well in those films, right? And so I think sometimes people are too quick to dismiss craft, because you can get an awful lot of craft. You can actually, you know, craft and artisan, like it is artisanal, it is crafted. It takes this like you know, ability to do things, and I think that's something that's celebrated in those films, whether it's among the special effects or the more you know, formal elements that Mann or something like that is interested in.
Well, and I think you're right, and I think it's interesting though that people who revere the 70s filmmakers or even those filmmakers themselves,
and I like a lot of those films. I'm just
saying, oh yeah,
I think that too many people, and especially even in film school, were like, sorry, can I say they shit on the like Spielberg and Lucas, but they you know, they hold up the New Hollywood as somehow unimpeachable, right?
Which is interesting though, because as I was just going to say, like, I mean, it strikes me that Coppola is a craftsman as much as he is, you know.
No, and I think there's a reason why Coppola sort of shepherded those guys in, along, right? But I also think someone like Scorsese walks that line as well between, you know, partly because he's a bit younger and stuff. But yeah,
they all become more smooth as filmmakers as they go on.
You know, maybe that's an argument that I've long rehearsed for decades.
Oh, good. Right? I'm glad that
but in my defense is often of like Spielberg and Lucas and Ridley Scott, guys that I like that are often maligned. But today, I think a lot of people who make film and write about film culture are people who are the children of the Spielberg Lucas era, right? The children of Star Wars who now inherited it. The disgruntled geeks who now you know, dominate Hollywood in the form of superhero movies and won't give up on their stranglehold of you know, filmmaking as adults. Maybe I'm more cautious about making that. Maybe I can see, you know, I can decry what hath been wrought in its name. I wouldn't even say that it actually shares many formal similarities with some of those earlier films. But in name only, this new stuff is made in the name of, right? Like, I mean, everything from Stranger Things to Marvel Cinematic Universe to you name it, you know.
Yes.
I think though that that doesn't diminish the accomplishments of those earlier films that I mentioned.
I mean, personally, I always associated Lucas and Spielberg with that crew.
Yeah, I think they were friends, but apparently a lot of now, what the trendy thing to point out on film Twitter is that actually those other guys like De Palma and Scorsese and them were all making fun of George, that he was such a loser and lame-o, and he wasn't doing coke. He was real. He's talking about his little Mattel super toy line that he's doing.
Right.
Right. And I think there's a dismissal of like even someone like Lucas's experiences, and maybe there's if his biography about his marriage falling apart and things like that, it's.
I don't really know about that.
Yeah, maybe another time we'll talk about.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm definitely somebody. I think, and if I'm thinking about American film, I would put up that era as among my favorites. I don't know if it's my favorite era generally. I would say I like the
50s are maybe the best.
1955 to 1962 or something.
68. I would go as far as 68.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm a contrarian that I like the 60s better because especially when I think internationally. Right. And I think broader than just like typical Hollywood grown-up fare from the 60s. Although there's a lot of great stuff in there as well. They got overlooked for a long time. Like one of my new favorite films, The Swimmer. But
I'm looking forward to rewatching that one again.
Oh, it's so good. I've watched that one a couple times now. I put it in the pantheon. But
that's on my list too.
So I like a lot of new Hollywood films.
Yeah.
But I would actually go so far as to say that I probably prefer the 60s to the 70s as a decade of filmmaking.
Okay.
And I think the 80s is highly underrated.
Yeah.
Again, especially when you go internationally.
Right.
Including East Asia and Europe.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I do look forward to you telling me more about that. And the 60s, the 60s are... They are phenomenal.
The 60s are the 60s. It's the same thing was happening in film that was happening in the rest of culture in some ways.
Yes, and I would also say another moment that makes me associate Thief with that kind of 70s aesthetic is when he meets Jesse at the bar for their first date. And they spend a lot of time focusing on the blues band that's playing there that night.
But that might also have to do with Mann's love of blues, right?
Yeah, Mann loves blues, and apparently
we haven't talked about Tangerine Dream. But,
yeah, we should talk about Tangerine Dream.
But he originally wanted to score it with blues, and then went with the cool like electronic iciness of Tangerine Dream,
which really I think works really well.
I like the score. I don't get but I have a higher tolerance for like 80s electronic stuff.
It makes sense for that movie. Mann himself, I think, has some issues with it.
But, it seems like he's like I'm still unsure of what.
But I think that, but so you have that moment where you're in and it makes me think of like those 60s films, like Blow Up, where you spend like a good 5 minutes on a Yardbirds concert going on in the middle of
music was important, right?
Yeah. But I just want to focus then on this one other quote because this wasn't in the interview, but I think it again sort of speaks to this idea of the character sort of being caught in between these worlds of independence and being dependent on social norms and also just a social structure. Where Mann said in an interview that Frank is kind of the locus of a left existentialist critique of American capitalism. That was the intent. Again, it's funny. He says that was the intent when in that other interview, he's like, existentialism, that wasn't one of the themes. But
he just said he wasn't constantly thinking of noir.
Wasn't consciously thinking of noir. That's true.
Not necessarily existentialism.
That's true. But as a leftist existentialist critique of American capitalism, what do you think about that?
I think that's implicit in a lot of these films of his.
Mm-hmm.
Even later films like The Insider, of course. He would go on to make Ali as well. Right?
Yes.
Muhammad Ali movie with Will Smith.
Yes.
which is critical of America, much like Ali himself.
Muhammad Ali was, yes.
Yeah. But so I think it's in there. I don't know how you could like watch. Although I guess people are like, they watch it and like, man, it's so cool. But it's like at the same time, you're like, damn, it's lonely and dark.
Yes.
World that these characters inhabit. Whether it's, and I do think Mann is one of those guys who's like a true auteur in the traditional sense, not in the 70s sense of like having his name on the script and having full independence, but rather in the old-fashioned sense that whatever he comes to, adaptations, other people's scripts, he injects his own personality and interests into them, right? So whether he's working with Thomas Harris Hannibal novel or going back to early colonial American text, right? Like he's kind of like brings his own unique ideas and personality and perspective on things.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting that Frank uses terms like the fruits of my labor a lot, which is you don't hear that much.
And so there's this weird thing where like Leo is like literally like the capitalist who's like, here you go, and he's like, no, that's I gave you more value than that. You're extracting surplus value from
that's
me.
Right.
You are exploiting me in the true sense. It's not about that. It's not about whether or not Frank's hard done by. Frank knows that he has done bad things and then served his time and takes responsibility. It's about, are you exploiting me? Exploitive relationship in that sense.
Yeah. And, Leo, the crime boss, does everything that a good capitalist boss should do. He's finding ways to ingratiate
babies.
You're getting him the babies. He's basically saying, I'm providing you this house. Yeah. I'm providing you this life that you want.
But there's this interesting way in which Frank is, though, still. What one leftist critique might be that his vision board, his fantasy is still very bourgeois.
That's right. So that's why,
and he aspires to be petit bourgeois, like to own his own things, to be independent of other people, and to do that. And he comes to understand that is a not possible in America.
Yeah,
you either have you're constantly compromised, you're constantly culpable, and it actually ends up taking away the very thing that you claim you value, right? Which is always to me the why I cannot ultimately reconcile people who are like consider themselves socially conservative in terms of family or whatever, and not see that nothing has destroyed the family more than capitalism.
Yeah, right.
To me that so like Frank maybe kind of comes to that idea.
Yeah, seems to. And as somebody else pointed out here, I'll get the actual name because I don't want to state it. A guy by the name of Stephen Rybin wrote an article which pointed out something interesting, which was to say that regardless of whether or not his car dealership is a front, which it obviously is, he's still a capitalist business owner, and he has laborers working for him, which we see in the movie. He kind of walks by them as they're working on cars and stuff.
But there's no escape if you're in America. There's no other way to live.
Right.
You literally. This is why the critique of it's like you're a socialist, but I see that you own property.
Yes.
Or you have a job. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Go and starve in the street?
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess what I'm saying is I think in the 70s or in the 60s and the 70s, you have this kind of, whether it's just utopian, whether it's just overly romantic, but you have this dream where this independence is really possible, that maybe we can escape the system and somehow. And I feel like Thief is potentially, it's kind of walking that line, because at the end of the movie, he does escape, but at a really...
But he doesn't get
great cost.
Like it's I guess based on speculation, but I don't feel like the trajectory is that he's going to get Jesse and the kid back.
No, I don't think so.
He does not get what he wants. So when he gives her the vision board, he also is like kind of
he doesn't get what he wants. He doesn't get his dream, but he does. He's now unencumbered again. He's outside of that exploitative relationship with Leo. Maybe he's walking back into one. Probably.
Exactly. But what choices does he have now?
Inevitably, he probably
may even go to prison. Like.
Right. So, but I do think that movie is kind of, I think it is playing out that relationship, right? That relationship between, independence and the sort of inevitable sort of social structure and social norms.
I think, and it's one of the things I like about the film, though, is in its maybe what that person calls a leftist existentialist critique. It does lay out one of the fantasies that you can escape from the system without any kind of mass transformation of the society as a whole. Like that's which is ultimately still an individualistic ethos, right?
Yeah.
And I think actually it's something, unfortunately, I see, in my opinion, too often on the left, is not seeing the way that the logic leads people back to individualism again, rather than collectivity and solidarity, which to me is one of the biggest, unique features of what I understand as leftist politics. So.
Yep. Now, do you think that just to tie all this back to the original point that we were making, do you think that this kind of character of somebody who's trying to escape the system as an individual really kind of goes back to those basic noir principles? Because as we said from the get-go, the noir detective is frequently an independent detective. He's a private detective, often has his own code, right? The reason why it's like the cowboy, it's this kind of American trajectory,
absolutely.
Right? It's the reason why the cowboy can do what he does, the reason why the noir detective can do what he does, is because they are not encumbered by anything else. They've got their own code of conduct. It's not like the sheriff who's a dud who always gets.
And a lot of people will connect Michael Mann to westerns, not just because he has the same last name as another great western director, but Anthony Mann.
Oh yeah. So, but and another interesting line that I picked up on the second watch was interesting for so many reasons. Frank, when he's having his first meeting with Leo, tells him all the things he won't do. He says he'll basically steal jewelry and he'll steal money, but nothing else. And he says, no, let me get the exact line here. He says, no cowboy shit, no home invasions. Now, it's interesting that he uses the word cowboy there and what he associates with that.
Which means loose cannon, which means,
That's right. And he does
guns blazing.
He does do a home invasion in this movie.
Yep.
And it's at the very end.
He breaks his own code in the end in order to break free again. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's where the noir stuff really kicks in, because it's like it's ultimately, like, if you want to talk about a film that could be interpreted as neo-noir, is something like No Country for Old Men. It's like, what use is your rule if it brought you to this, right? Like,
right.
This idea that rules and codes are no protection.
Yeah.
But so there's an ambivalence and a tension in Thief, at the same time that the rules and codes, I think I said earlier tonight, are part of the thing that gives him meaning and allows him to stave off like a nihilistic meaninglessness.
Yeah. Great. One other point that I just want to bring up that I learned from the director's commentary that I was just watching this afternoon, which I think is funny, is apparently, because Jim Belushi is in this movie. I don't know why I have to keep coming back to it, but
I know it's funny. It's funny.
It is. It's funny.
He's fine. It's a little role, but he's fine.
Yeah, he's all right in it. Pink trees. That's his big line in the movie. He's also in the new Twin Peaks, for that matter. But apparently John Belushi was kicking around the set.
Oh, interesting.
Quite a bit, because it's a lot of it's filmed in Chicago, and that's a big spot for the Belushis. And I guess what would happen is they opened up a blues bar. Only this would only happen with Belushi related. They opened up in Chicago a blues bar that would be open just for the for the crew of the movie.
Amazing.
And they could go to the blues bar once the shooting wrapped. They could go hang out at the Belushi Blues Bar.
And they got people playing there. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I have been to a Chicago blues bar, and it's great. But I don't think it was this one.
No.
I wonder if they kept it going. Yeah.
Well, what is that? Is the House of Blues Belushi related?
I'm not sure.
The
one I went to in Chicago was at a big film conference. It was really good. It was like there were 2 rooms with blues musicians, and people would move back and forth during the performances and like they'd sort of overlap, so people could catch a bit of each, and you'd actually get to know a lot of like interesting artists and stuff. And it would serve like really like basic beer and stuff, and it was like I kind of like it was a really good real experience. It was good.
That's awesome.
I only knew about it because a colleague, guy that we knew, he did one of his degree, I think his PhD at Northwestern. So
now the other thing,
right, that's the one just north of Chicago, right?
Yeah. The other thing that I'm a bit uncertain about is we talked about how he blows up the bar.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real bar in Chicago. So I don't know if and that sign is iconic. So I don't know if they just did a model of that bar and blew that up.
Could be.
Yeah, I'm not sure. House of Blues. It was founded by Isaac Tigrit, the co-founder of Hard Rock Cafe, and Dan Aykroyd. So it's slightly
different Blues Brother.
Different Blues Brother. I got the wrong Blues Brother. Yeah. So, well, those are my.
Really? Never mind.
No, what were you gonna say?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask if you had any thoughts about the movie that we haven't talked about.
No, I mean, I managed to squeeze in some talk about the soundtrack. I like it. I look forward to you watching more Mann movies, so we can talk about them.
I do. I think I'm gonna.
I'm gonna get on my bike and ride over and give you Heat right after this.
Well, it is on Netflix.
Okay, perfect. There you go. It'll be.
It's long though.
Yeah, it's like almost 3 hours long. It's epic when they say. Also, great Val Kilmer performance in there too.
I share your perspective about long movies. The idea that I don't get the criticism of movies being too long.
I actually just had this conversation with someone yesterday, walking the kids to school. Like, my big thing is the problem is like because my son wanted to watch Shang-Chi, the new Marvel film, like, and for part of a birthday party thing, and it was like it's 2 hours and 15 minutes long. I'm like, that would take up like too much time during the thing. Like, why can't these movies need to be like 90, 100 minutes or 3 hours? Like, you either going to make it like worth my time,
right,
or make it so I can get in and out, right? Like, and not every movie deserves 3 hours. Like,
no. Oh, I agree. Like, I actually like a nice tight 80-minute movie. Those are a treat to watch it. To watch a nice 80-minute movie.
They don't make those anymore though.
They don't make those.
Even anymore. Hong Kong, you get a nice 90, tight 90 or 100.
Do you know why? Why is it that they don't make movies?
I don't know. People feel it because of television. If you go too short, people feel like it's just 2 television episodes or like 2. I think that's partly what it was like. That's actually speculation. I shouldn't say, but I suspect it has to do with television.
I think you're probably right.
I think post television, you have many fewer movies that are under, 80, 90 minutes at the shortest, right? But there used to be, it was not uncommon. I watched a couple of this Halloween, like a couple of the old Universal films. Like I think The Black Cat is only like 63 minutes or something like that. And
I watched them too. They were fantastic.
But they're fine. That's great. I love it.
Yeah.
That's just what I need.
Yes.
A lot of, like I said, a lot of Hong Kong directors like Johnny To will make it like a nice 90-minute movie. Boom, boom. But yeah, you don't see that too often in Hollywood. I think it might have also have to do with like the way that things were booked in the double bill feature era. A lot of the B movies were shorter, so right? They could just fit them in,
right? Yeah, but I also like the great 3-hour movies from that time period as well. I like 2001. I like
2001 is not as long as people think.
It actually goes by pretty fast.
No, it's also like literally like
that throws me off.
It's actually only, what's the runtime on it? I'm gonna look it up.
Okay, we'll check it out. But I'll throw out a few other long movies.
Yeah, it's only 142 minutes.
Lawrence of Arabia.
By the way, believe it or not, it's only 142 minutes. The most recent James Bond movie is longer.
So not even 2.5 hours.
No.
Yeah.
It just feels like 3 hours.
Yeah, people. It does feel long.
I say that as a guy who literally had it voted as the #1 film of all time on our Three Brothers.
Oh, it's an amazing movie, but it's a very slow movie. So you gotta be
purposely full.
You need patience to watch it, but it's
me. I love slow cinema. Go watch some Zhejiang after this or something like. Chinese contemporary Chinese director does great slow cinema.
I love slow cinema. The slower, the better. I don't know if I've mentioned this on this stream before, and sorry if you need to go. I'll let this go in just a minute. But I have trouble understanding things that are. My brain is just not geared right for things that move
hyper fast editing.
Yeah, Gina and I one night where we went to the drive-in, and one of the movies that was playing at the drive-in. This was a long time ago. It was the A-Team. And we were about 5 minutes into that movie, and I turned to Gina and I said, I don't understand a single thing that has happened in this movie at this point. I have no idea where we are, what's happening. I don't know anything that's going on. Because there was no shot that was longer than 3 seconds.
And they don't do establishing shots, and they don't do medium shots. If they do any establishing shots, it's probably already done by second unit.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And then a bunch of close-ups, and then you edit that together. It's a horrible way of making movies. And to be fair, even the guy who made that movie, Joe Carnahan, can shoot a better film than that.
Right. Well, that drove it home to me. It explained to me why I think I am at home with movies like 2001 or A Woman Under the Influence or something like that, because those movies are, I think, for most normal functioning brains, excruciatingly slow. But for
but what's normal functioning? We're all like a bunch of like screen addicts, right? As we broadcast into the void here.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I can't understand it if it's any faster than that. I don't think so. I have a difficult time. I have a hard time just in general understanding what's happening in a movie in the first 10 minutes.
I was gonna say, for me, I'm like, just pause right after. I just sometimes have a hard time understanding what's happening. Period.
Overall,
life. It's like, don't really get it.
It is. It's like, for me, it is like, and I say this as somebody who loves movies and loves watching movies, and even loves watching movies that other people might say, I don't understand what's going on in this movie. But I think maybe I have that feeling for every movie, and so I don't recognize the distinction between those kinds of movies. But
life.
My life. I'm like Peter Sellers in Being There.
Yeah, exactly. You don't disagree.
I just wander around. The channel. Thus Spake Zarathustra is constantly going on in my head as I'm walking down the street. I like television. So yeah, but it does take me a long time to kind of understand a movie. I have to be about 15 minutes in before I'm now I know who characters are. Mm-hmm. Can I share with you one other embarrassing thing? There's a great Buñuel film called The Obscure Object of Desire.
I'm aware of it. I haven't seen it. I think I told you that in the summer, that I know last summer when you went through that Buñuel.
Okay.
I haven't seen very many. Yeah.
I may have told you this before then. So the one of the very interesting things about that movie is that the lead character is played by 2 actresses. So it's always a surprise as to who it's going to be in a given scene. And there's no rhyme or reason. It doesn't go one on, one off, one on, one off. And I was maybe an hour into that movie before I realized that was what was happening.
Yeah, it's also like subtitled and not.
Yeah, I was paying attention to other things.
I think it's pretty like intentionally confusing in that sense.
Thank you, Anders. I appreciate that.
It's been well, right? Like it's meant to be like surreal and like, wait, what's going on? Like,
yeah, that is a fantastic movie, though.
I want to see it. Yeah.
despite my confusion over it.
But now I won't be confused because you told me. Thank you.
There you go. You'll know there's two actresses playing this role. They do look incredibly different too. In retrospect, it's like what how did I not?
Strange,
yeah. Anyway, I think it's good to share these embarrassing things. But that movie's also in my favorite movie list, so I guess it didn't really matter in the long run.
Have to check it out.
Yeah, it's a really good one. Well,
thanks for having me on. Hopefully, I hope it was coherent. Considering I haven't seen the movie in a few months, so.
Yeah, no, it was very clear to me, so I think that works out. You had very short notice for this, so I really appreciate you coming on.
Like I said, go talk to Michael Mann for an hour or so.
Yeah,
sounds good.
I was thinking if you're free, I might ask for your assistance one other time, maybe before the end of the year, because I know that we both like the movie A Christmas Carol so much. So if you are around to talk about that,
Alistair Sim, yes,
yeah, the Alistair Sim version, yeah. So that might be
it's like, I'm in.
All right, awesome. Well, we'll work that out because I think that's a great movie to talk about. But so thanks so much. Oh, do you want to just plug your?
So my brothers and I have our website, 3brothersfilm.com, 3 brothersfilm.com, and we post reviews. Most recently, we've had a couple. We did a roundtable on Dune, which was a lot of fun, which we saw. And then we have a podcast which we launched almost coming up on a year anniversary in a couple months.
Wow.
And our most recent one was on the new James Bond film, No Time to Die. And we enjoyed it. It's a spoiler podcast, so once you've seen it, you can listen, and we have a good time kind of talking about whether we think the movie works and the final Craig film and all that. And we're going to be, I'll give a little preview. Our next episode will come out in about 2 weeks. We're going to be discussing the new Wes Anderson film, The French Dispatch, which I just saw.
Oh yeah. I'm very eager to find out what your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So there's that, and we got some other and end of the year reviews you could probably expect. We're finally going to wrap up our Zack Snyder series that we did this year before the end of the calendar year. And we're going to probably have reviews of some other big 2001 20-year releases because that was about when I was starting university and it really got into like film stuff. So I have a review working on Donnie Darko, which should come out in a little bit, and the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Yeah.
So
that'll bring me back. That'll be nice.
Yeah,
that'll be great. It's a great website, and the podcast, I've listened to every single one, even though I haven't seen the new James Bond movie. I did listen to the one on James Bond. It's fantastic. I'll provide links actually in the little section down here below in the YouTube.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. So I do encourage everybody to watch that and or listen to that and read the zine blog. What do you call it? I don't know what the kids are calling it these days. I can't watch fast movies.
Publication.
Yeah. Publication. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thanks so much, Anders. It was great having you on again. I look forward to having you on again.
No problem.
And
a lot of fun.
And we'll see everybody on the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.